This is the Aesthetic Ecosystems Podcast. I'm Ben Hale, your virtual design guide to help you and your family have a healthy, beautiful landscape with less work. What's up, and welcome to episode 16 of the Aesthetic Ecosystems Podcast. Today we are going to be talking about when to hire a designer. That's right, guys. When it comes to our landscape and our projects, sometimes it's just best to hire something out for multiple reasons. But of course, sometimes you just want to do things yourself too. So we're going to try and tease out when is, for you, this is, again, different for each person, each individual situation, each property, and each family. So for you, when is it the right time to look for a designer, maybe for consultation or for full design work or design and implementation work? So today we're going to go through basically a Q&A checklist of things you can use to decide for your landscape whether you should hire a designer or not. And that's really it, guys. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So the way I'm going to break this out is a little bit of background and just to align us on what our goals are again for our landscape, and then going into what you can consider for your projects and when is a designer right for you. So some of the questions you should be asking yourself, and then after that, if you've decided to hire a designer, what you need to do to make sure you get the best out of working with your designer and also maximize their potential at the same time, and how to make sure you have a good situation, a good relationship with your designer, and to get the most money's worth out of that that relationship. And a little bonus at the end for anybody who's in Ohio, I've got a great resource for you as well. So with that, let's get into the topic today. So a little bit of background on this whole thing and a refocus on our goals. And so the first is a background for me and where I'm coming from. And this might help you understand things and also might help ground us with this whole discussion. So for me, I grew up, and I still am in many ways, a do-it-yourselfer. I'm a person who likes to, slap on my boots, go out there, throw on some split leather gloves, and get to work, and do it myself, get dirty, get some sweat out, and have a good time at the same time, make, at the end of the day, feeling like you actually did something. There's something to be said about that, to build things yourself, to look back, see your accomplishments, and feel good about it, That's how I grew up. That's how my parents raised me. That's what my parents are too. Most of the things in our house, the whole house basically needed rehabbed when I was growing up, and so I was thrust into that situation. I was up on our roof shingling at a ripe old age of probably I don't know. I was like 7 or 8 years old the first time I was up on the roof, and now child services would probably be knocking on people's doors if something like that happened. But back then, I survived, right, and my siblings survived, and I know how to do roofs at an age of 7 or 8 years old. So but that's how I grew up, and so there's something to be said and admired about doing it yourself. But at the same time, sometimes it's the most value for your life, for your time, or for your family, just to have somebody come in and do the process the right way sometimes, or the easier way or the time-saving way. So there are multiple reasons to hire a designer, and I'll admit, back in the day, not too distant past, I kind of turned my nose up at people who have somebody come in and help with their landscape or their house or whatever. It's a resourceful way to do things yourself. But I've come to realize sometimes our time is the most valuable thing, and that's again what this this podcast is really about. It's not just about landscapes; it's about time. And having time to spend with your family and the things you care about and the things you value. And if something like hiring a designer can free up the time and the energy and the peace of mind for you to do things that you care about in your life, then it's totally worth it. And I'm saying totally worth it from the standpoint of the monetary input you require to do that, as well as just the being able to admit to yourself that somebody else has a better skill set with this, or a more appropriate skill set with this, and I'm going to value their time to help me with this, to get it done properly, to get it done potentially faster or potentially better. And that's going to free me up to do more valuable things with my life. And that's what we're really talking about here today. So that background, I come from a do-it-yourselfer background, but I acknowledge now that there is value in bringing some expert in to help you for multiple reasons. And so that's what we're going to tease out today is there a right reason for you to hire a designer to come help you either design your landscape, consult with you on a few things, or potentially do the design and installation? So the whole 9 yards. And there are even designers that have partnerships or have a crew that helps with the maintenance, the long-term maintenance, not only establishment phase, but the maintenance phase as well. So things to consider here as we go through this process. Now, I want to say, coming from a do-it-yourself background, I also acknowledge that there are drawbacks to this, and that's kind of what I'm getting at today, is the other side of the coin of the do-it-yourself type attitude and the get it done attitude is doing it yourself. It's good for small projects. Generally, doing it yourself can save a lot of hassle, actually, if you just get it done, bang something out. If it's something you can attain yourself and it's a manageable size project for you and maybe a few family members or a few friends or a few neighbors to kind of come together and get something done and, have some good camaraderie at the same time, there's certainly something to be said about that. And, I guess it's the modern day barn raising, if you think about it that way. And DIY can also be good for the maintenance phase if it's not too overbearing and it's something you can do and something that actually connects you with your landscape. It might be worth it too to do it yourself, right? But on the flip side, doing it yourself can take time, right? It can take away valuable time if this is time you'd rather be spending doing something else. So something to consider there, as well as doing it yourself, especially when you're talking about your whole landscape. It can be a haphazard process. And so what I mean by this is actually the case of our landscape right now, is I haven't sat down with our landscape. It's kind of in a little bit, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I guess ashamed is a strong word, but I'm a little embarrassed. That's a better word, right? Embarrassed to admit that I haven't sat down and fully designed a comprehensive plan of our landscape yet. And it's simply because I haven't sat down and focused on it. But it's something, part of the plans, and I definitely hope to share that with you guys too, because it's a fun and exciting process. But so as a result, our landscape is kind of like a haphazard landscape. It's just kind of been slapped together. There's a few random plants here and there that probably shouldn't be where they are because it hasn't been properly planned. And I'm definitely a victim of the clearance aisle plants sometimes. Like, oh, this is a great plant, I just need to have this, and then I don't actually have a plan for where to put it, and so it ends up getting put in just kind of a random spot. So sorry to my wife, Corey, for this, if she's listening. This is kind of how our landscape is right now, and definitely the plan to make it better. So I'm counting on you guys to hold me accountable to plan our landscape properly for the sake of my wife and my family and my neighbors. Help me out with that, right? Okay. So it can be haphazard is my point there. And at the same time, you can also, by not fully planning it or not having done it properly, you can actually lead to long-term issues in your landscape. Whether these are maintenance issues or design issues, it can lead to long-term problems. So that's just something to consider when you're doing it yourself. Are you in over your head, basically? Or do you really know what you're doing? And that's something to consider, and it's really important. Okay, now I want us to take a bit of a step back and think big picture about why we want to have a lower maintenance landscape. And remember again, if this is your first episode, maybe you haven't heard this, and I really strongly recommend you go back and listen to episode 1 of the podcast. And also, if this is your first episode, thank you for listening, and I'm really excited you're here. This is awesome stuff to me. I'm really excited about this podcast and sharing all of my knowledge with you, and I hope you come here to save time in your landscaping, and that's really what it's about here is that your landscape and your life, when it comes to both of those things, your life is more important than your landscape and being out there and having to sit there and maintain it all the time. And so what I'm sharing on this show is tips and tricks and tactics on how to save time in your landscape so you can spend the important parts of your life on what's most important to you, and that time in your life on what's most important to you. So that's what we're really focusing on here, is we want beauty in our landscape. We still want to have a beautiful landscape, but we also want to have to be able to spend less work on it. So we're not talking about a botanical garden here that we want in our yard, where we have to be out there every day managing it, maintaining it to keep it pretty and attractive for when we come home from work and want to have a little breath of fresh air and beautiful sight to look at when we come home or when we have guests over, right? So we still want that beauty, but we don't want to be a slave to our landscape where we're working at it all the time and having to maintain it and keep it proper so it looks right and looks nice. And so I want to just point out that there are many designers that are very good at designing beautiful landscapes, but they don't always design low-maintenance landscapes. With that said, though, there is a growing population of designers out there that do design beautiful, low-maintenance landscapes, and that is our goal here. So when we're looking for a designer, I want to preface this whole discussion now with we want to try and find a designer that is capable of designing you a landscape that you don't have to be out there maintaining. You don't have a ton of plants with disease issues that you're trying to fix and a ton of just general issues that you have to be out there working on, or a lot of pruning and mowing and all that stuff. So when we're talking about hiring a designer, we're talking about hiring a designer that's capable of producing a low maintenance landscape for you that is beautiful and enjoyable at the same time. All right, we've covered a good amount of background now about, first of all, where I come from. And if you're a do-it-yourselfer, hopefully you can identify with that a little bit. And if not, that's perfectly fine too. But I at least want to give you guys the perspective that even though I come from that background, I acknowledge that there are times where it's actually really beneficial to have a designer coming in and helping you. And also, we've also covered our goals, right? What's our overarching goal? And that is to give us more freedom in our life, right? And not to have to be, sent outside to take care of our landscape or spend a bunch of money to maintain it and that sort of thing. So those are our goals. Now let's get into how do we choose whether or not to hire a designer and help focus us on making that decision, right? I want to make that decision very easy, very as clear-cut as possible for you so you're not stressing out whether or not you made the right decision. So let's get into it. Here is what to consider about your yard projects. And also I want to point out that if you go over to the show notes, it's basically you can print this out or copy it and paste it as essentially a checklist. All right. All of these questions I'm talking about, I've got in the show notes. So you can go over there. You don't have to be writing notes down or whatever. If you're driving, you just focus on your driving. And, and generally speaking too, guys, just so you know, all the show notes have a basic general outline of the podcast. So for one, you can scan it over and see if it's worth listening for you. I'll totally acknowledge that, some podcasts are worth listening to, and I'm not going to say every single podcast is going to be the most value for you. And I want to save you guys time even in listening to this podcast, right? So if you want to scan out the show notes and see which podcasts are valuable to you, each show notes has a basic general outline of the show and what I talk about. And of course, the whole show is in further depth. And so for today, basically you can go over to the show notes and get a printable outline of the questions I'm talking about here and whether or not to hire a designer for your landscape, and then also what characteristics to look for in your designer relationship. Okay, so let's get into it. First, I want to say, when it comes to considering your yard projects, do you know what you're doing? Do you actually know what to do with your project, how to plan it, and then how to implement a design and how to establish and maintain your project? If one or more of these things are unknowns for you, it might be worth hiring a designer. And if you feel pretty comfortable with this stuff, again, a lot of this is based on the scale, which is going to be another question later, is how big of a project are you talking about and how comfortable do you feel about it? If this feels like an unknown or a big thing, or you find yourself digging through a bunch of YouTube videos just to learn some stuff, it actually might be worthwhile for you to go out and find a designer instead to do some of this work for you, because they have the training, they have the experience and the knowledge to do some of this work. Okay? The next thing is, what scale is the design, right? We just kind of talked about this. So how big is your design? Are you talking about a tiny little garden plot right in front of your front of your house or around your mailbox? Or is this a more extensive design that we're talking about, where we're going to be planting our whole front yard or our whole backyard, or we're dealing with an extensive issue? Maybe you're dealing with some root issues that you want to design out of your landscape somehow, or you're dealing with some drainage problems. Some of those issues can be more serious and might require the help of a designer, or maybe even a landscape architect to help deal with. Some of the more serious issues where you're really doing some massive changes to your landscape might actually require the help of a landscape architect, and that might be out of your scope, right? Because some of this has to deal with larger scale stuff that might affect drainage and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so what scale is the design? Next piece is, how substantial is the change? This kind of goes part and parcel with the last piece of the what scale. But there's a subtle difference here. How substantial is the change? It could be a small design, but if you're putting in like a massive retaining wall as part of that design, or you're doing something that might change the drainage on your property, or something like that, or planting some trees that really are going to change how your property is perceived in the next 10 years or something, it might be a substantial change that you really want to have some professional opinions on. So again, if you're talking about a major change, it might be good to have some of that perspective. Okay, next, do we have existing beauty on our landscape? So do we already have a pretty good design and we're just kind of looking to spruce things up? And maybe this is something you feel pretty comfortable with doing it yourself. Maybe it's just the addition or removal of a few plants that might make a big difference. Or, kind of sprucing things up with some hardscape elements that are pretty capable of handling on your own scale. So let's say you do have an existing beautiful space, whatever space you're considering, whether it's a part of your yard or the whole yard. The part I want to say about that too is the design piece comprehensive? So does it go through the whole design, or do you have kind of hodgepodge elements in your design? Whether, again, we're talking about a garden or the whole landscape here. So does it look like it is fully designed, or do you just kind of have a few hodgepodge pieces put together? And along with that too, is it cohesive? Does it feel like it all fits together? So is it comprehensive and cohesive? Or do you just have like specific parts that are well designed, or parts that are beautiful? Or do you have a good cohesive and comprehensive beauty going throughout your design? And that's, again, with your whole landscape you're talking about, as well as the specific garden you're talking about. And there's good ways to figure out having a good cohesive design where it feels like a unified space, it feels like a fluid space, and it really has its own unique character to it. So that's important when you're talking about your existing beauty. Okay, moving on. Do you know the right timing for your projects? It's really important to get the timing right, where you're planting at the best times, you're dealing with you're avoiding potential weed issues popping up with the way you implement your design, is the timing of planting your design. And at the same time that you're also giving the best chance for your plants to succeed. So that's really important. Next, do you have time to plan the project? So a good project does take time to plan it out, to articulate what you want for one thing, and to put it into practice. So put it into a cohesive design that is well articulated and then also carried out. And so that planning piece does take a significant amount of time to avoid the right issues. So if you don't have the time, it might be worth the investment to hire an expert to do that for you, and to do it in a way where you can feel more confident in the outcome. So the time is an important piece, as we've touched on a lot here. And same with that, do you have time to implement your project? So the actual implementation of your project requires a significant amount of time too. And if this is something you enjoy, it might not be that difficult, but it could take away from a lot of family activities. Say it takes a weekend. What if you spent that weekend camping with your family, or catching up with old friends, or visiting distant relatives, things like that could be better parts or better time that you spend instead of working on your landscape. So do you just need a super quick spruce up with your landscape? So maybe you're trying to increase the curb appeal. Maybe you're trying to sell your house, right? Sometimes this is something, if you feel comfortable, you can do it yourself, but you can also hire a designer to do this too. You say, you approach your designer and say, look, I just want to, really make my yard pop. Just do a few things that's, not an overhaul of my landscape, something low cost that you can design quickly, that can last more than, just a season. But it really, spruces up the curb appeal of my house, helps it sell, and maybe even increases the value of what I get out of it. So that's something you can think about either for yourself or for a designer. And so sometimes a quick spruce up of your landscape can really make a big difference and is worth it. The next, do you lack design skills? Some people, I totally get it, are design illiterate. Either they can't perceive what something on paper looks like when you put it in your landscape, or they can't go through the design process, and that's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, it's totally worth acknowledging that some people are really good at design. For example, I when it comes to graphic design, I am totally graphically design illiterate, and this goes to all the way down to the clothes I wear. And so I have to talk to Corey, my wife, about okay, does this look okay or not? And she has to give me sometimes a real wake up call and say, hey, I'll admit though, my older brother wears used to wear tapered jeans. That's never been a thing of mine. So I have two older brothers, and I'm not going to clarify which one's which, but I've never at least made that much of a fashion design faux pas. But get back on topic here. One of my brothers is a graphic design major, and kudos to him. He actually designed me a beautiful logo. That's the current logo. If you look on the screen of your podcast player there, you'll actually see the design logo that he designed, which is awesome. And so thanks, Tim, for the design. And the design I had before that, I made in PowerPoint, and now that I look back at it, to be fair, I made it in about 10 minutes when I was trying to launch my brand, and it was something I did super quick, but just the color scheme was totally off. The design itself was totally off, and I am graphic design illiterate. So sometimes just like that, it's totally worth having somebody to come in and coach you on your landscape. And that's something that's totally okay, because some of us are skilled at some things and others of us are skilled at other things, and that's fine. Okay, so that wraps up basically the Q&A checklist I have for you to reflect on for yourself, and as to whether or not you should have a designer come in and help you with your landscape. Whether, again, it's part of the design process or part of the implementation process, or both, or even just some consultation. And so important things to consider there. And with that, guys, I do want to put a plug in here. You can go over to aestheticecosystems.com/consulting to get a digital consultation with me. Right now, this isn't going to be something that I'm offering forever, but right now I am offering one-on-one virtual consultations with your landscape. And if you have any questions, I have some flexible options there to consider. And so something for you to consider if you just need a quick chat or consultation, or even more in-depth chat and consultation, there's a few options there for you to check out. So aestheticecosystems.com/consulting, and you can check out the link in the show notes as well. Okay, enough plugs for me. Let's get moving on. So some of the benefits of design is that a good design is cohesive. So it feels like a unified space. So if you think about, Washington, D.C., right? For you Americans out there, and a lot of you non-Americans, when you look at a picture of the U.S. Capitol, you see the big, wide expanse of the I'm blanking on the terms. I guess it's the Capitol lawn, right? And then those big reflection pools out front too. Well, that design was planned that way to give a feeling of power and legitimacy when the U.S. government was still trying to establish itself as a legitimate nation in the early phases of the United States. And that feeling was deliberate to make it look expansive, to make it look like the royal European nations that had these wonderful, beautiful, expansive designs that are very formal and geometrically designed. And so a good cohesive design can actually convey a feeling or a get you thoughtful, or it can actually invoke something, I guess is what I'm getting at here. I guess I'm going too long, guys, because I'm starting to become at a loss for words. So I'll wrap up here soon. So a good cohesive design is important, and also a designer can actually, make something feel updated or in style. What was popular in the 1950s for a landscape design is not popular or even appealing today. So that's something where a designer can really help you have the right style, or maybe you want to have a specific style or a unique style. They can really help you with that. And a lot of designers are very well versed in various forms of style. And next, it's just convenience sometimes, right? Sometimes the convenience is worth the expense. Let's be honest. So there is an additional expense when you're hiring a designer for any level of consultation or help or design work. But sometimes the convenience or the peace of mind or the time you get back for your life is well worth the expense. So again, this is talking about your time, which is more limited than sometimes your expenses in your life. So there's just something to consider there. So let's say you've actually decided to hire a designer. What do you do? What do you do to ensure a good relationship, that you get the most out of it, and that you're happy with the end result? So I want to just go through some things here to help you figure that out. And I want to preface this discussion with what are the motivations of your designer, right? So understanding what motivates your designer can be very helpful. They don't just want to, most designers, I'll be honest, some might be not so great, but most designers, they actually want you to be happy. They want you to have a good result, because most designers, for one, they want your repeat business. So even though you're designing one part, you might be of your landscape, you might be coming back for a future help, or after your design's been implemented for a few years, you might want to spruce it up, or there might be an issue that has arisen or something that's changed, and they'll want you to come back to them saying, hey, you did a great job. We need help with this piece next, and can you come help us? In addition, most designers, the word of mouth references are the most important means of business for them. And so they want you to be happy enough to tell your neighbors and friends and everybody you know about how good of a job they did. So with that said, what do you need to do to ensure a good relationship? Well, first and foremost is clear, open, and frequent communication. So you want to be as clear and concise with your communication as possible, and also to communicate your expectations. So you might have a certain expectation, and sometimes, I'll be honest, it's very hard for us as clients to communicate or to vocalize what our expectation is. And so it's part of the discussion process of the designer to help understand and maybe even tease out what you're thinking. And unfortunately, not all designers, of course, we can't all read a crystal ball, right, for ourselves. And the designers can sometimes have a hard time understanding what you want. And so the more you have a chance to discuss your goals, the more likely you both will be able to understand what it is you want and to implement that in your design, or to make sure it's carried out through the design process. And so it's really important for you to get clear on what you want from your yard. And then once you get clear on that, how to convey that to your designer as well. Likewise, this is a family process. So openly discuss with your family about what you want and also what you don't want. And this is personally for you what you want, and also to understand from your family what they want. So for example, what your kids want out of the landscape might be incredibly important in making sure they want to go outside and play, right? Or they want to get outside and work with you on the landscape in a way that's healthy. and what your spouse wants from the landscape as well. So what do they want to feel? What do they want to get involved with? How do they want to experience things? Is there something new they want as part of the landscape? And so involving the whole family as part of the landscape is very important. And likewise, when I say part of the family, let's face it, a lot of times our pets are a family member too. So what does your pet want out of the landscape? Is there something that could enhance their experience with your landscape if they're an outdoor pet? So something to consider there. And next, make sure you discuss how to make the landscape as low maintenance as possible. This is very, very important because a designer might come in and design a beautiful landscape that's so amazing, maybe even from day one. But if it's not a low maintenance landscape, it's going to quickly become a burden. It might be very costly to hire somebody to maintain it, or it might be very costly in time for you to maintain it, and might cause a lot of just problems and stress and burden in the future. So really make sure how to make a low maintenance landscape for you, and find the right designer to really ensure that. So the next piece is to understand that the designer is the expert here, right? We're hiring somebody for their knowledge, their experience, and their skill set. And at the same time, though, they're also the provider of a service. And so because they're the provider of a service too, you need to ensure that you maximize their knowledge, but also your satisfaction by fully understanding your needs and also clarifying your needs at the same time. So this goes back to the communication piece I was talking about earlier, is remember that this person has a unique skill set that you may not have. And because of that, it's really important to get clear on what you want and what they can offer to match that up as best possible to get the best value out of what you're working on here. The next piece, again, you guys will see a very consistent theme of communication here, is to make sure you touch base throughout the whole design process. Make sure you're providing feedback, and this is okay. Even if it's feedback that you don't like, you can do it in a very appropriate way. You don't have to be rude about it, but to provide feedback of, you know what, I appreciate what you're doing here, but this I don't like, or this I'm not a huge fan of, or you know, I'm not really feeling this design, or I'm having a hard time visualizing whether I would like this. This is all appropriate feedback. And to say, you know, here's some stuff I found that I like. Can we make this low maintenance? You know, to provide some visual examples if you're having a hard time articulating what you want. So taking the effort on your part to go find something you like, or examples of certain things you like. Put together like a mood board, right? A virtual mood board, or even a physical one. And, you know, these are the colors I like. These are some design cues that I like. Here's some feelings that I enjoy. And again, we're talking about the whole family here. And trying to really tease out with your designer what you want and articulate that as best possible. So providing feedback is okay. And this is throughout the whole design process. So if you're really not feeling something, it's better to rewind and redesign as opposed to put something in that's very hard to change after it's put in. So with that, make sure you're providing clarity and also acknowledging and encouraging parts you like. Let me say that again. Acknowledging and encouraging parts that you like. So if you're not totally sold on a landscape design proposal, let's say, but there is certain parts you like, maybe your designer can then take the parts that you like and expand it further or further enhance it to really make it a design that just pops for you, that feels right and feels great. And that's what we want here again. The last thing I want to say with touching base throughout the design process is asking as many questions as needed to fully understand. So it's totally okay for you to question either the process or what they're doing or how they're doing it for you to fully understand. So think of this as what pops in my head here is if you're in the hospital, right? It's the more questions you ask, the more fully you understand things, the more options you potentially have, and the more clear you can be and confident you can be in what's being done. And so the same goes here. The better you understand the process, what's being done, the more confident you can feel, the comfortable you can feel, and also the more you can provide feedback along the way to ensure a happy and caring and thoughtful result, I guess. So let's move on then. Okay. The next piece, so let's say you've got a design you're happy with, or at least you think you're happy with. Now what happens next? Well, the installation process. And I'm assuming here that you're having the installation done or by somebody, right? So the first thing with the installation process is do your best to be present during the installation as much as possible. And the reason for this is if there's something that's going on that you don't feel is right, then you can be present, you can talk about it, and you can do it in a way where hopefully nobody gets upset, and it gets taken care of as quickly as possible, as early as possible. Because again, the later it's caught, the more difficult it is to change something. And so be willing to ask if things just don't feel right. So you have to be able to ask questions. And likewise, make sure you let your providers do their work. So if you're just curious, what does this lever do on the mini excavator that you have? That can really be disruptive to the whole work process of the people that are coming in to help you install this landscape. So make sure it's the right questions, right? So if you're concerned about what somebody's doing or how they're doing it, and it just doesn't seem right, that's okay. But if you're just curious, maybe it's better to ask that afterward or later on, like curious with something they're doing or how they do it, that doesn't really affect the design. So make sure you let them do their work when they can or they need to, unless it's something you're concerned about potentially or you really want to clarify. So that's what I want to tease out there. The next piece is after the installation process, understand any establishment needs. So what do I need to do to make sure that these plants get properly established? Is there any erosion stuff that I need to be concerned about? Things like that, the early establishment phase is very important for the success of plants and also the success of a design for soil health and that sort of thing as well. So it's important to understand what those needs might be because they might assume something that you might not know actually. So it's really important to understand that. The next piece, of course, is to finalize the payment. Make sure your designer is happy, your installer is happy, and that you're happy as well, that you guys have already been clear on what payment situation goes on, and to just get that wrapped up so it's taken care of. And last, this is very valuable, especially if you're happy, to leave a review or a recommendation for these people, whether they have their own website or potentially like Angie's List or house.com or something like that. If there's a way to leave a review for this person, especially if you're satisfied with their work, it can be very beneficial for their business. They will greatly appreciate it, and it's very helpful. Likewise, if you just say over the top happy with what they've done, sometimes a testimonial that they can put on their website is incredibly valuable for them. So you can actually leave like just contact them first and say, is this something you would like? And you can actually like record a short video if you're comfortable with that, or, provide a short blurb, a few sentences of your satisfaction with them in whatever way. And sometimes that feedback is incredibly beneficial for them and their business. So I'm sure they'd greatly appreciate it. So something to think about there, of leaving a review or a recommendation for them is something that's great. Okay. So that's what I have today as far as choosing a designer and making sure you're happy with the whole design process if you've made that choice. And so the last piece I want to say here is for you lucky people that are from the great state of Ohio or live close by, what I've done is I've put together a resource by doing a collaborative exercise with a lot of the top low maintenance designers in Ohio, and they've come together, provided a great resource on the top low maintenance plants that they use in their designs. And so this is trees and shrubs. There's a few trees and shrubs, but mostly what they've provided is a ton of plants that can go into smaller garden designs, as well as grasses that you can use in your designs as well. And this is a great resource that they've provided. But what I've also done is shared the participating designers. So these are some of the top designers across Ohio for low maintenance landscapes. And if you'd like to get in touch with any of them today, I've provided a link in the show notes where you can get in touch. I have their contact information there. And for those of them that have websites, I also have their websites as well. So you can go check them out. And so go over to the show notes, check out the Ohio designers, as well as any other information that you might want to refer to today. And last, if you haven't considered leaving a review for the podcast, just like reviews are great for these designers to leave reviews on their websites, I'd greatly appreciate it if you like this show to go ahead over to iTunes and leave a review. So I want to share a review that's already on iTunes and so for those of you who have left a review, I also want to say thank you very much. Your reviews have been incredibly helpful, and these reviews are helpful for new people that are considering listening to the show. It helps them click on that first episode and come check it out. Okay, so I have a review from Zich $, or maybe that's Zix. And Zix says, by the way, I love the usernames that I've seen on iTunes so far. And for those of you who don't know, that you have to leave this short nickname, and it has to be a unique nickname that hasn't been used before. So what it's led to is some pretty cool creativity from some of the reviewers. So thank you also for making me chuckle, reviewers. But this is from Zix, and Zix says, great information, tips, and tricks. Love the talk on soil chemistry. So thank you for leaving a review. And for those of you who also have left a review, thank you very much. And with that, guys, also thanks for tuning in, and make sure you live with passion and make tomorrow better than today.